Hi everyone, Stephen Elliott of CoherentBreathing.com, back with my second YouTube post relating to my Shift Network interview of a few weeks ago now. Today I'd like to elaborate on the matter of the coherent breathing frequency or rate. At the time of the research and leading up to the development of coherent breathing, I was in pursuit of two goals. One goal was to identify the breathing method at large that would help mitigate the human condition of autonomic imbalance, specifically sympathetic dominance. And number two was to identify the breathing method at large that would reliably elicit the awakened mind brainwave pattern, something I was also studying in depth at the time. The chart I have before you now is a model derived from the breathing-induced heart rate variability recordings at 4 different breathing frequencies, each with equal periods of inhalation and exhalation. And we can see here that in red we have 30 breaths per minute. In orange we have 15 breaths per minute. In blue, we have 7.5 breaths per minute. And finally, in green, we have 5 breaths per minute. And what we can see here is that as we either reduce the breathing frequency from 30 down to 5, or if we were to increase the breathing frequency from 5 to 30, the amplitude of the breathing-induced heart rate variability cycle changes dramatically. So as we go down in frequency, the amplitude grows dramatically from roughly 3 beats in amplitude at 30 breaths per minute to 34 beats in amplitude at 5 breaths per minute. An important point about this is that the peak of the heart rate variability cycle is indicative of sympathetic emphasis or activity. The valley of the heart rate variability cycle is indicative of parasympathetic emphasis. And again, this is very much like a pendulum swinging. A pendulum swinging is an exact analogy for what we're trying to achieve in the way of coherent breathing control. We can also see that as the breathing frequency changes, the average heartbeat rate also changes. As we go up in breathing frequency, the average heart rate also goes up. And the other way around, should we be going down in breathing frequency, where then the average heartbeat rate goes down. This is very natural and is what we would expect. And it's something that normally occurs during any kind of aerobic exercise, any kind of exercise that elevates the heart rate. That is that breathing will begin to quicken and the average heart rate will also increase. Lastly, I'd like to point out that at 5 breaths per minute, the peak of the heart rate variability cycle is slightly above that of breathing at 30 breaths per minute. And the valley is 34 beats below at 60 beats per minute. So we can see here that in the great scheme of things, it isn't a linear affair, that there is a resonant frequency in play here, and as we tune into that, the heart rate variability amplitude increases, as does its relative position on the y-axis. One final point regarding this graph, this being the difference we see in the valleys of the heart rate variability cycles associated with these 4 different breathing frequencies. The red graph bottoms out at 90.5 beats per minute. The orange graph, that of 15 breaths per minute, bottoms out at 84 beats per minute. The blue graph, that of 7.5 breaths per minute, bottoms out at 77.5 beats per minute. And then the green graph, that of 5 breaths per minute, bottoms out at 60 beats per minute. A 17.5 beat per minute difference between the valley while breathing at 7.5 breaths per minute versus 5. And I posit that this big difference in average heartbeat rate is indicative of gained parasympathetic emphasis through slowing our breathing down. Now to point number 2. A second goal, as mentioned, was finding a reliable way to elicit the awakened mind brainwave pattern as detected with EEG, which I had been practicing with my own EEG gear in my office every morning for a matter of a couple of years. And I had been training with Anna Wise at Esalen Institute several times in this period. But these were the 2 things that I was looking for, and it turned out that by and large they were the same thing. In other words, the breathing method that yields autonomic nervous system balance also, when combined with other coherent breathing factors, elicits the awakened mind brainwave pattern. I later traveled to Anna's office north of San Francisco and spent the afternoon with her such that she could evaluate my ability to elicit the awakened mind brainwave state in her chair using Mind Mirror, which she did do several sessions in a row and confirmed for me that I was able to turn the awakened mind brainwave pattern on and off at will. And here I'm talking about in a matter of seconds, not in a matter of minutes or tens of minutes. As mentioned, there are a number of other factors having to do with the coherent breathing protocol that yield a coherent outcome and a balanced outcome, where here I refer specifically to autonomic nervous system balance. We've talked a great deal about breathing rate and frequency. The flip side of that coin is breathing depth, where our goal is to use, let's say, 50% of our diaphragm range, which would equate to a couple of centimeters up when we exhale and a couple of centimeters down when we inhale. This begins to generate the wave in the thoracic pump, and that wave makes its way out of the lungs when we exhale into the left heart and out into the arterial tree, and back again from the capillary circulation through the venous tree, through the right heart, and into the lungs upon inhalation. But it is depth that generates positive pressure in the lungs when we exhale and negative pressure in the lungs when we inhale. So it is the physical parameter that is generating the force that is sending blood and causing blood to return to the chest. Other than the heart, which is a pump that follows the thoracic pump and pressurizes the blood in the arterial tree and shuttles the low pressure blood in the venous tree back during inhalation. Symmetry is also a critical factor, and here I refer specifically to the equality of inhalation and exhalation phases of breathing. A very, very common question that I've received over the years has to do with various breathing methods that propose inequality one way or the other. And I don't disparage or support those methods. I do advocate that coherent breathing requires symmetry. And the reason for that is that we, again, are emulating a sine function with the diaphragm. And a sine wave is by definition equal in amplitude, both the positive going and negative going aspects. So sinusoidality requires symmetry. And symmetry is a major contributor to autonomic state. Finally, there is the matter of relaxation. Relaxation was at the crux of my investigation early on, in that the generally accepted understanding of breathing frequency and whatnot doesn't really take into account conscious relaxation. Now, we know that coherent breathing alone will facilitate relaxation, whether we're conscious of that or not. If we're conscious of our breathing, it will automatically facilitate relaxation of low threshold muscle motor units throughout the body, including those of the arterial tree. But here we're talking about aiding the naturally occurring relaxation that happens coincident with exhalation, with our conscious intent to let it all go. When I demonstrate this, I will sit in a chair, inhale, and then as I exhale, I'll go limp and fall out of my chair onto the floor to make a point. And that point is that we're wanting to learn to ride the relaxation response that naturally occurs during the exhalation process. Now, the reason for the occurrence of this is the same as that results in the autonomic swing toward parasympathetic emphasis during exhalation. Now, an overall finding, as demonstrated in the previous chart, is that 5 breaths per minute is the bottom of where I found that I could go in my research regarding both heart rate variability and autonomic balance, as well as the elicitation of the awakened mind brainwave state. I understand that resonance may exist below 5 breaths per minute, but I personally haven't explored it very much, and now, armed with Valsalva Wave Pro, I know a lot more about what it takes to determine what the precise resonant rate of an individual is, and it isn't a trivial undertaking. The other thing is that as we go below 5 breaths per minute, I found that there was distortion in my heart rate variability cycle, and it also caused my EEG to deviate away from the awakened mind brainwave pattern that I was aspiring to produce. Now, a bit about heart rate variability, frequency, and spectral analysis. For this discussion, I encourage the reader to pull up a browser and point it to this address. This was a major reference relative to my early research on this topic, and remains accurate and viable today, even though the last update, it is noted, to the content occurred in 1997. Now, this explains the broad spectrum of heart rate variability, which is generally from 0 to 0.5 hertz. And it divides that broad spectrum into 2 primary bands. The high frequency band, defined as 0.18 to 0.4 hertz. The middle of this band is 0.29 hertz. And if we convert that to breaths per minute, that comes out to 17.4 breaths per minute. The article also goes on to say that the high frequency band is generally considered to be identical to respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And this is where we get the nominal average breathing frequency of the typical adult as being approximately 17 breaths per minute. Then there is the low frequency band, defined as 0.04 to 0.15 hertz. The middle of this band is 0.095 hertz. And if we translate that into breaths per minute, it comes out to 5.7. The precise operating frequency of Coherent's pacing products is 0.085 hertz, which translates into 5.1 breaths per minute. Now, since a goal of mine was to mitigate the human condition of sympathetic dominance, I decided to err on the parasympathetic side of the center frequency of the low frequency band. Again, that center frequency being 0.095 hertz. So in the end, the breathing rate of Coherent's pacing products is 5.1 breaths per minute, or 0.6 breaths per minute below that of the center frequency of the low frequency band as defined at this site. However, as compared to the popular rounded up figure of 0.1 hertz, Coherent's pacing products are 0.9 breaths per minute slower, or 0.015 hertz. This difference yields a measurable outcome in heart rate variability amplitude, in EEG pattern elicitation, and in one's own internal perception. A last point before I leave this slide. If one breathes at the rate of 5.1 breaths per minute and remains comfortably still, one will, within a matter of 8 to 12 minutes, automatically begin to enter a meditative state of mind. And this can be quantified with EEG. Here there is no learning how to meditate per se. There's no knowing anything about meditation except to remain still, and by that I mean free of fidgeting, and to breathe at this nominal rate of 5.1 breaths per minute, trying to stay as controlled as is comfortable. A last word about breathing frequency. Here is a graph from Valsalva Wave Pro that presents the Valsalva Wave power spectrum over time in the upper panel, and the heart rate power spectrum over time in the lower panel. This is a simultaneous recording where both the Valsalva wave, the blood wave produced by coherent breathing, and the heart rate, the outcome of the blood wave produced by coherent breathing, are being recorded and plotted simultaneously by the instrument. This is while the breather is breathing along with Coherent's Respire 1 vocal instructive sequence. Note that the spectra are virtually identical. The power spectra of the breathing-induced heart rate variability cycle being an outcome of the power spectra associated with the breathing-induced Valsalva wave via the recognized function of baroreception. And this brings us to the end. Thank you very much for your attention.